أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. الحمد لله رب العالمين، والحمد لله الذي هدانا لهذا وما كنا لنهتدي لولا أن هدانا الله، والصلاة والسلام على إمام القبلتين ونبي الحرمين وأفضل الثقلين وجد الحسن والحسين، الذي سمي في السماء بأحمد وفي الأرض بأبي القاسم محمد، وعلى أهل بيته الطيبين الطاهرين المعصومين الصادقين، والذين ذهب الله عنهم الرجس وطهرهم تطهيرا. اللهم صل وسلم وزد وبارك على صاحب الدعوة النبوية والصولة الحيدرية والاسمة الفاطمية والحلم الحسنية والشجاعة الحسينية والعبادة السجادية والمآثر الباقرية والآثار الجعفرية والعلوم الكاذمية والحجج الرضوية والجود التقوية والنقاوة النقوية والهيبة العسكرية والغيبة الإلهية. اللهم عجل فرجه وسهل مخرجه. أما بعد، فقد قال الله في كتابه الكريم: بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم: وجعلنا منهم أئمة يهدون بأمرنا لما صبروا وكانوا بآياتنا يوقنون. صدق الله العلي العظيم. For the love of Ahlul Bayt alayhim as-salam, sallu ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. For the love of Fatimah al-Zahra in particular, a second salawat ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. For the hastening of the reappearance of the master of our time, a louder salawat ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. When one examines the martyrdom of Imam Husayn upon the day of Ashura, it will become clear to them that the martyrdom of the Imam was an event which sent shockwaves throughout the Muslim world. And it's an event whose impact continues until this day. You see, this is something which is against the principles of time. Because the principle of time states that the more time goes on, the less an event is remembered. Even an event of a great geopolitical significance in a 50 to 100 years, you find that these events, they're forgotten. If I phrase it in another manner, if I were to ask you that what is the name of your great-grandparents, you find many individuals, they won't be able to give the name of their great-grandparents, even though that individual is the father of your father. That, in other words, it is from them that you come. But just within 50 to 100 years, you don't even know their names a lot of the times. But when it comes to the remembrance of the day of Ashura, despite all of the factors being against Ahlul Bayt at that time, you see, in that time period, wealth was in the hands of Banu Umayyah. Political influence was in the hands of Banu Umayyah. Material means were in the hands of Banu Umayyah. But the one thing which wasn't in the hands of Banu Umayyah was the Mashiach and the will of Allah. And when God wants to manifest His will, you find even if all of the obstacles are against the thing from the outward perspective, that will manifest. As in, it wasn't it that Pharaoh wanted to prevent the birth of a boy in the household from the children of Israel. And what Pharaoh would do is that he would kill that each of the male children. But Allah created such a system that Musa, who would be the destruction of Pharaoh, was brought up in the very house of Pharaoh. You see, when God wants to execute his will, even in the most miraculous of manners, that will, it manifests. In the same way you find that Banu Umayyah, who sought to suppress the truth and the reality about the day of Ashura, such a system was created by Allah that the remembrance of Imam Husayn begins within the very lands of Banu Umayyah. That when Sayyida Zainab, she goes towards Damascus and she goes and mentions her famous sermon, you find a point it comes that even the Christians who were within the court of Yazid at that time, they began to say, Yazid, that who is this individual whose head has been brought towards us? Yazid, after hesitation, would say that this is Hussein, the grandson of the Prophet Muhammad. At that point, the Christians within that court would say, Waylakum, that woe be upon you, that we are those individuals who are from the lineage of the disciples of Isa. But even after all of these years, people give us respect because we are from the lineage of the disciples. But you carried out such an act that you killed the son of the daughter of your prophet. You see, in that manner, the reality of the day of Ashura began to be manifest. And whenever you have a reality and an event of such significance, as I mentioned, this reality will manifest in different ways for different individuals. You know, the Quran says, كُلَّ يَوْمٍ هُوَ فِي شَأْنٍ, that every day, every moment, God manifests himself in different manners. You see, on the day of Ashura, many of the maqatil, they discuss that what was the outcome and what was the final result of those who carried out the crimes in Karbala. You find that many of these individuals, their adhab and their punishment, it began within this world. There was an individual, for example, Tabari in volume 5, he writes that there was an individual from the tribe of Aban bin Darim. And from this tribe, that individual, what he had said to Sayyid al-Shuhada on the day of Ashura is that, oh Hussein, never will you drink from the Furat. The son of Asbagh bin Nabata Qasim, he narrates that that man who said this line to Imam al-Husayn, we would see that in the end of his life, he would drink water after water, but his thirst was never quenched, nor was he satisfied. Another tradition, Sayyid ibn Tawus says, there was an individual by the name of Jabir ibn Yazid al-Odi. This individual, when the body of Imam al-Husayn was laying upon the ground, this individual had taken the turban of Imam al-Husayn, and when he placed the amama of Imam al-Husayn upon his head, you find that person began to suffer from insanity. So you find that Imam al-Husayn, on one side, he was a means of najat and salvation. But on the other side, this group, you find that their eternal damnation happened. Why? Because they didn't recognize the reality of Imam al-Husayn. You see, on one side, those individuals who would loot the body of Sayyid al-Shuhada, those individuals would be afflicted with a punishment within this world. But then we have examples of companions of the Imam, somebody like Debal al-Khuzai, that Imam al-Rida gives his shirt to Debal, and Debal takes a yarn, a string from that, and he is able to give shifa to a servant. On one side, you have the clothing of an imam, one group is gaining punishment. On the other side, the clothing of the Imam, Di'bal is gaining shifa. So the question is that what was the difference? The difference was the ma'rifah and the understanding of the Imam. That's why to understand Sayyid al-Shuhada is something which is of the utmost importance. When you look at all of those individuals who wrote even within the school of Ahlul Bayt about what was the philosophy about the day of Ashura, and at the end of the day, what was the movement of the Imam all about, you find that each of them gave different views. For example, when you look within the history, you find there was one group of individuals that said that you shouldn't study about the day of Ashura. You'd say to them that, what do you mean one shouldn't study about the day of Ashura? They said that Imam Husayn says in a tradition, Amarani Rasulullah bi amrin wa ana madin fi. That Rasulullah had commanded me to carry out an affair and I carried it out. Or they'll say that Ashura was just the responsibility of the Imam and no one else. We reply by saying that number one, without a doubt, the responsibility of Sayyid al-Shuhada is much more than each and every one of us. But when Rasulullah said to his ummah, that when you see the members of Banu Umayyah upon the mimbar, take him from the mimbar, that was for each and every member of the ummah of the Prophet. But yes, it's a different fact that Sayyid al-Shuhada carried it out. So you find this was one group of individuals. Another group of individuals said that the reason Imam al-Husayn, he goes to Karbala is to die for the sins of the Shia. You find that this was the view of Allama Naraki. That he says Imam al-Husayn could have made a dua. And the dua of an Imam is accepted. He could have ended everything there and then. But the fact that Imam al-Husayn goes through the trouble of being martyred is because he wanted shafa'ah to reach towards the followers of Ahlul Bayt. Now from the first angle, this view and this opinion, without a doubt, the traditions of shafa'ah are there. The tradition, it says that in front of Imam as-Sadiq salawatullahi wassalamuhu alayhi, in front of Imam as-Sadiq, Abu Harun al-Makfuf was reciting lines of poetry. The Imam says to him that if one recites poetry for my grandfather Hussein and 50 individuals cry, falahul Jannah. For that individual is paradise. After that, the Imam says, no, if 40 cry, for him is paradise. The Imam keeps coming down until he says that man anshada shi'ran fi jaddi al-Husayn, that the one who recites a line of poetry for my grandfather Hussein, even if he makes one person cry, or he himself cries, or if he even makes the expression that he's crying, falahul Jannah. So you find that these traditions, they are there within the works of hadith. But at the second level, this does not mean that that was the goal of Imam al-Husayn. Imam al-Husayn was that individual that every movement of Sayyid al-Shuhada was absorbed in the love of Allah. And if shafa'ah is coming through the remembrance of Imam al-Husayn, then this is an outcome as opposed to the goal of Imam al-Husayn. You see, the goal differs from the outcome. The goal of Sayyid al-Shuhada was to re-enliven the religion. But yes, outcome of shafa'ah for remembering Imam al-Husayn in intercession is because of the greatness of the sacrifice of Sayyid al-Shuhada. So the point that I'm making is that when you look even within the school of Ahlul Bayt, you find a diversity of opinions as to why Imam al-Husayn goes to Karbala. So the question is that how do we sort through this diversity and come to a conclusion as to what the real reason behind the movement of Imam al-Husayn was? And without a doubt, one of the ways to do so is to examine the sermons of Imam Husayn on the day of Ashura. You see, many of us within the communities, we have a general understanding of the martyrdom accounts. And we have a knowledge of some of the dialogue of Imam Husayn with Aba Fadl Abbas, for example. Or his dialogue with his son Ali Akbar, for example. Or his dialogue with his nephew Qasim, for example. But if you take a general survey and you ask the community that, can you name me just one line from the sermons of Imam Husayn on the day of Ashura, you'll find that the majority of people, they won't be able to do so. But the reality is that within these sermons, an individual is able to gain an insight, number one, into the status of Sayyid al-Shuhada, number two, into the goals of the movement of Imam al-Husayn, number three, into the characteristics of those who were the enemies of Ahlul Bayt, and what characteristics had led them astray. You see, amongst these sermons which we find on the day of Ashura, the first sermon that Imam al-Husayn delivers is at the onset of the battle. Imam al-Husayn, time and time again, he wanted to avoid the battle. Why? Because he didn't want him to be a source of punishment for another group of people. Even when they arrive in Karbala, before the numbers on the army of Umar bin Saad begin to grow, Zuhair ibn al-Qayn says to the Imam that, "Oh Imam, that if we fight this group of individuals right now, it'll be better for us because their armies are continuing to grow and we'll fight them right now." Imam al-Husayn, in his reply to Zuhair, shows that he did not want to initiate the battle, nor did he want to fire the first arrow. He says, "Oh Zuhair, I do not want to be the aggressor in this situation." So what does Imam al-Husayn do? On the day of Ashura, after the time of Fajr, when 30,000 individuals are ready to attack Sayyid al-Shuhada, Imam al-Husayn gives one sermon to give them another opportunity to come to the path of Haqq. You see, when it comes to you and I in our lives, when an individual does one small thing to us, we're ready to write that individual off for life to the point that we don't even remember what they did to us. All we know is that we have a grudge against that individual. But the awliya of Allah, the divine guides of Allah, the prophets of God, are those individuals that even when somebody wronged them, they would use every opportunity to guide that individual. These are those same people who on the 7th of Muharram stopped water from the army of Imam al-Husayn. But Imam al-Husayn stands there and he gives them another opportunity. You see, Sayyid al-Shuhada in this manner was a reflection of the attributes of God. There's a hadith which says, "Takhallaqu bi akhlaqillah," that act in the way that God acts. Without a doubt, none of us can have those characteristics of God at the level of Allah. But each of us, at our own capacity, can be a manifestation of those divine qualities. That if Allah has mercy, we bring mercy into our hearts. And if Allah is Al-Ghafoor, we learn to forgive other individuals. And if Allah gives opportunities, we give opportunities to other individuals. You see, Imam al-Husayn, when he gives them this opportunity by preaching to them, he's manifesting this quality because it is the way of God to give opportunity to his creation. That when Allah created this world and the heavens, Allah created the balance in such a way that man could be successful. And what do I mean by that? God would say that, O mankind, when you do one good deed, I will write it tenfold for you. But when you sin, I write it one time. You see, the scale was balanced in the way for mankind to reach paradise. That paradise is the rule, not the exception within the eyes of God. And that is the reality of God's mercy. One tradition says that the mercy of Allah is divided into 70 portions. One portion within this world, 69 in the hereafter. And Imam Husayn at the end of the day is the grandson of Rasulullah, who was that rahmatan lil alameen. So Imam Husayn, he stands on the day of Ashura. He begins to preach, to give one more opportunity to the opposing side. And he says, Ayyuhan nas isma'u qawli wa la ta'jilu. That, O people, listen to my words and do not make haste until I counsel you about that right which I have over you. You see, the first thing, when you look at the sermon of Imam al-Husayn, the first thing Sayyid al-Shuhada makes clear is that an imam has a right over the entire ummah. You know, Allah says in the Quran, Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim, Ya ayyuhalladina amanu, Atiullaha wa atiur rasula wa ulil amri minkum. That obey Allah and obey His Prophet and those who are invested with authority from amongst you. You see, when you look at this verse, the word obedience comes 2 times in this verse. But there are 3 groups of individuals. Obey Allah, obey His Prophet and those who have authority. You would think that if there's 3 groups of individuals, Allah would say the word obey 3 times. Obey Allah, obey the Prophet, obey those with authority. But when Allah mentions the word authority and obedience before Allah, and He mentions it 1 time before the Prophet and those with authority, what this goes to show is that authority is at 2 levels. The first level is the obedience to God, which is the ultimate obedience. But at the second level, when the word obey only occurs once before the Prophet and those with authority, it goes to show that to obey Rasulullah is to obey the ulil amr. And to obey the ulil amr is to obey Rasulullah. In other words, if there is an individual who creates a prayer that wasn't around in the time period of Rasulullah, then such an individual cannot be from the ulil amr. Because over here, the word obedience is one. You'll say that, do I obey the Prophet or do I obey those individuals? For a group to be those who have that authority, they should be in unison with Rasulullah. And their reality shouldn't contradict one another. In other words, to look at the first of them would be like looking at the last of them. And to look at the last of them is like looking at the first of them. And there is only one group about whom it's stated, Awwaluna Muhammad, Akhiruna Muhammad, Awsatuna Muhammad, wa kulluna Muhammad sallallahu alayhi wa alihi wa sallam. That all of these individuals have the same reality. In other words, when Imam al-Husayn says upon the day of Ashura, that obey, that let me counsel you about that right which I have over you, that right is the right of Rasulullah. And Rasulullah says, Husaynun minni wa ana min al-Husayn. That Husayn is from me and I am from Husayn. And that reality of obedience to Rasulullah manifests in the wujud and the existence of Sayyid al-Shuhada. So Imam al-Husayn, after he mentions this line, he says that if you accept my explanation, I will mention to you why I've come to this land. And if you believe my words, then there will be peace for us and prosperity for you. Sayyid al-Shuhada, the second point that we take from this sermon is that the Imam is saying that true prosperity is when the Imam of your time is pleased with you. You know, there's a hadith known as the hadith of Unwan al-Basri, where a 94-year-old individual comes to Imam as-Sadiq after going to the classes of Malik bin Anas, and he says to the Imam that, allow me to take from your knowledge. The Imam sends that man away. And he says that, keep going to Malik, فَإِنِّي رَجُلٌ مَطْلُوب, that I am a busy individual. That person, he goes to the mosque of Rasulullah. And when he goes to the mosque of Rasulullah, he recites 2 units of salat. And he says, Oh Allah, I ask you to make the heart of Jaffar as-Sadiq open towards me, to make his heart soft towards me. And at that point after that, when he goes to the door of Imam as-Sadiq, the servant of Imam as-Sadiq comes out and says, Udkhul ala barakatillah, now you're able to enter upon the blessings of Allah. In other words, an individual needs to be in that habit, that for blessing to come into their life, that individual should pray for the Imam of their time. Whether it's a dua, whether it is salawat, whether it is to give sadaqah upon his behalf, you find these actions are something which have a profound impact and blessing in the life of an individual. And what blessing and barakah really is that whatever you have, maybe it remains the same in quantity, but the quality of that reality is something which will increase. That what you have will suffice you. Your life will be of more comfort. And you find all of these realities, they're associated with that. So you find Sayyid al-Shuhada says to those individuals that if you accept my wording and you listen to my judgment, then you will be in a state of blessing. But if you turn away from me, فَأَجْمِعُوا أَمْرَكُمْ وَشُرَكَاءَكُمْ ثُمَّ لَا يَكُنْ أَمْرُكُمْ عَلَيْكُمْ غُمَّةً ثُمَّ اقْضُوا إِلَيَّ وَلَا تُنْذِرُونَ. Then at that point, gather those who are with you and make your plan, but don't hide this plan and carry it out against me, and do not wait. So Sayyid al-Shuhada, in this first portion of the sermon, he goes to show that in such a situation, he is an individual who is reliant upon God. And that tawakkul is something which is seen within all of the awliya. You know, I mentioned some points about tawakkul yesterday, but when you look at those divine guides of Allah, or you look at those individuals who are close to God, these individuals generally are those people who worked hard in the path of God. And they're those individuals who are at the peak of struggle. But despite being at the peak of struggle, they never say that all which we have is because of us. Even at that moment, they turn towards Allah. Is there an individual upon this earth who worshipped like Ali bin Abi Talib? That Amir al-Mu'mineen, 1,000 units a night, Amir al-Mu'mineen would pray. When Amir al-Mu'mineen would go to the mosque, they would see Amir al-Mu'mineen in sujood, not moving, to the point that a companion such as Salman, he goes to Janab-e-Zahra and he says, Zahra, Ali has passed away. Janab-e-Zahra says, Salman, what do you mean? Salman says, I saw him laying at the mosque with his head upon the ground. Fatima Zahra says, Oh Salman, I see Ali 1,000 times in this state every day. But that same Amir al-Mu'mineen, who every moment of his life he worked hard in the path of God, that same Amir al-Mu'mineen shows such tawakkul that when we read in Dua al-Kumail the words of Ali ibn Abi Talib, he says, Ya Sari al-Rida, Igfir liman la yamliku illa dua. That, oh, the one whose pleasure is quickly attained, forgive that individual who has nothing but dua. Imam Zainul Abidin in Sahifatul Sajjadiyah, he says, Allahumma usbihu wa umsi. That, oh Allah, I spend my days and my evenings mustaqillan li amali. I spend my days and my evening with these actions which fall short before you. You see, what this demonstrates is a state of ubudiyya and tawakkul. And when Imam Husayn says to the opposing side in the sermon that come towards me, make your plan, then this is showing that the maqam of tawakkul is something that Sayyid al-Shuhada is at. When this sermon reaches this point, it's stated within the maqatil that the women of Ahlul Bayt, they began to cry. Imam al-Husayn sends Ali Akbar and Aba Fadl Abbas, and he says, tell the women to stop crying, because after this, by God, they'll have much more to weep over. Imam al-Husayn, he continues to the next part of the sermon. You see, in the next part of the sermon, Imam al-Husayn begins to speak of the cause as to why those individuals opposed them. Imam al-Husayn is mentioning that these individuals were absorbed in the world of materialism. Sayyid al-Shuhada says, Ibadullah, O creatures of Allah, know that you should be warned of this world. This world is a place of finitude. It is a world which is temporal. And if there was anyone who was going to live eternally upon this world, then surely the prophets of God deserve that eternity, but you find even they perished. This is that world where bounties, they go away, and freshness, it fades away. And the reality of this world is like building a house upon the slope of a mountain. When you build a house upon the slope of a mountain, you find the foundation is weak over there. And that is that reality of this dunya. You see, on one hand, yes, this dunya is that place where one acquires the material for paradise. But on the other end, you find that it's a double-edged sword, because that individual becomes absorbed in the materialistic world. And the reason we really get absorbed in materialism, if you really think about it, is because we're trying to fill a void within us. That there is some sort of unhappiness, there is some sort of anxiety, there is a gap over there. So we try to fill that gap by being busy in materialistic pursuits. But when we acquire those materialistic pursuits, then we realize even that is insufficient. That's why those ulama who followed the spiritual tradition, they said that no one in this world has been worshipped besides Allah. You say to them, what do you mean? That aren't there atheists? Aren't there individuals who don't worship Allah? They mean when they say this line, that everyone within this world is after that pursuit. And that ultimate aim which they're seeking is perfection. It's peace. And that peace and perfection only comes when an individual absorbs himself in the reality of God. That's why the Quran says, "Ala bidhikrillahi tatma'innul qulub." That verily in the remembrance of Allah, the hearts, they find rest. And Sayyid al-Shuhada, to remind these individuals of the harms of materialism, he reminds them of the reality of the hereafter. You see, the reality of life is this, is that if you want to know how short life is, it's stated whenever there is a salatul mayyit, there is a namaz janaza, there is no azan and iqama within that salatul mayyit. But when a child is born, you recite the adhan in the right ear, you recite the iqamah in the left ear. In other words, that adhan and that iqamah for one's funeral prayer is announced at their birth time. And that is that reality of life. Imam Husayn is reminding these individuals. Then when Sayyid al-Shuhada, he moves to the final portion, he says to them that, do you not know that I am the son of the daughter of Rasulullah? Do you not know that my father was the cousin and the wasi of Rasulullah? Do you not know that Hamza was the cousin of my father? And do you not know that Jaffar al-Tayyar was my uncle? Did you not hear that my grandfather said, Al-Hassan wal-Husayn Sayyiday Shabab Ahlul Jannah? That Hassan and Hussein are the princes of the youth of paradise. If you don't believe any of my words, then go and ask Jabir bin Abdullah al-Ansari, and go and ask Abu Sa'id al-Khudri, go and ask Zayd ibn al-Arqam, go and ask these companions of Rasulullah, have I taken your property or have I killed any of your family? Sayyid al-Shuhada once more, he reminds them that who is he? He wanted those individuals to recognize his reality. But despite knowing who Sayyid al-Shuhada was, these individuals, they carried their attack upon the household of Ahlul Bayt. And without a doubt, one of the most difficult moments was the martyrdom of Ali Akbar alayhi salam. You see, what is the masayib of Ali Akbar? Ulama, they say that the masayib of Akbar is such a musibah that only recite it on special occasions. For the followers of Ahlul Bayt, they can't handle the musibah of Ali Akbar. You know, Imam al-Husayn gave each of his companions a special place. But when it comes to Ali Akbar, there is something Imam al-Husayn does that he doesn't do anywhere else. The Maqtal, it says that when Ali Akbar falls to the ground, فَوَضَعَ خَدُّهُ عَلَى خَدِّهِ, Imam al-Husayn places his cheek on the cheek of Ali Akbar, and then after that he says, عَلَى الدُّنْيَا بَعْدَكَ الْأَفَايَ Akbar, that, O Ali Akbar, after you may this world turn to dust, O Ali Akbar. You see, the nights of Masayib are here. The Masayib of Ali Akbar is that Masayib where a mother will understand that Masayib. Because a mother, when her son doesn't come home, that mother doesn't sleep at night. The heart of that mother doesn't have rest. But a point came on the day of Ashura that Ali Akbar would go and ask permission from his mother Layla. And Layla would say, "O Akbar, what is there after you, O Ali Akbar?" Ali Akbar replies by saying one thing. He says, "Oh my mother, if my grandmother Fatima Zahra said to you on the day of judgment that who is more aziz and beloved to you, Hussein or Ali Akbar, what will you tell my grandmother?" You see, Layla gives permission. It's stated that there was once a caravan from Iran, and they were going towards Karbala. Sheikh Abbas Mazandarani, he narrates that they reached Karbala on Friday night. And he says, when we reached Karbala on Friday night, I was within the haram of Sayyid al-Shuhada. And when I was in the haram of Sayyid al-Shuhada and I opened the book of Masaib and Musibah, within the book was the Musibah of Ali Akbar. On that Friday night, when I was reciting the Masaib of Ali Akbar in the shrine of Imam al-Husayn, It's as if everyone within the shrine was crying. Abbas Mazandarani, he narrates, that night when I went to sleep, I saw Sayyid al-Shuhada within my dream. I said to the Imam that everyone does your ziyarah, why have you visited me? The Imam says, oh Abbas Mazandarani, the first reason I visited is that anyone who does my ziyarah, I visit them as well. The second reason I visited is that I want you to give my salam towards my Shia within your town. Abbas Mazandarani says that who is this Shia? What does he do that you are sending your salams? The Imam says that whenever there is a majlis and a gathering where I'm remembered, that Shia, he sits by the door and he fixes the shoes at that majlis. And because of that, I'm sending my salam. But then Sayyid al-Shuhada says, oh Abbas Mazandarani, the final reason why I've come towards you is that never recite the Masaib of Ali Akbar on a Friday night within my haram. Abbas Mazandarani says, oh Master, oh Mawla, did I recite something wrong? He says, you didn't recite anything wrong. But on Laylatul Jummah, the soul of my mother Fatimatul Zahra comes towards Karbala, and she can handle anyone's masayib. She can't handle the musibah of Ali Akbar. She says, oh Hussain, how did you lift the body of your son, oh Hussain? When the day of Ashura it came, Ali Akbar recited the azan on the day of Ashura. You know, Ali Akbar wasn't the mu'adhin of Sayyid al-Shuhada. You find, but on that day, the day of Ashura begins with the adhan of Ali Akbar. Whenever anyone would come to Imam al-Husayn, Imam al-Husayn wouldn't give them permission immediately. When Qasim came, Sayyid al-Shuhada doesn't give ijazah. When on and Muhammad comes, Sayyid al-Shuhada doesn't give ijazah immediately. But when Ali Akbar comes to Imam al-Husayn, the Imam says, Taqaddam ya waladi, that oh my son, go forward. But oh my son, before you go towards the battlefield, go and bid farewell towards your aunt Zainab, O Akbar. Because it's Zainab who raised you, Ali Akbar. Hamid bin Muslim says, when Ali Akbar goes to the tent of the women, every time Akbar would come out, one of the women would bring Ali Akbar back. He says that when I would watch the tent, 7 times the curtain opened, 7 times the curtain closed. It's as if a janazah was leaving from the house of an individual. But he says, as I was looking to the tent, I noticed that there was somebody who was grabbing the shirt of Ali Akbar. And I thought to myself that if it was somebody older, they would grab by the shoulder. But who was it that was grabbing the shirt of Ali Akbar? When I looked closer, it was a young girl that as she held the kurta of Ali Akbar, she would say, Ya Akbar, irham ghurbatana ya Ali Akbar. That, oh Akbar, have mercy upon this loneliness. That it was the sister of Ali Akbar, Sakina. Akbar returns. Imam al-Husayn gives ijazah to Ali Akbar. Ali Akbar, he gets upon his horse, he begins to go to the Maqtal. But as he's going towards the Maqtal, you find that he hears that someone is behind him. At that moment, Ali Akbar, he turns around. When Akbar turns around, what does he see? He sees his father with his hand upon his back. Akbar says, oh Baba, you already gave me need ijazah and permission. But the Imam says, oh Akbar, anta lasta sahib al-awladi Ali Akbar. Oh Akbar, you don't know what it's like for a father to bid farewell to his son. The Imam says, oh Akbar, go towards the Maktal. But oh Akbar, turn your face around so your father can see your face, oh Ali Akbar. Ali Akbar, he goes to the Maktal. You know, when he goes to the battlefield, the Maktal, it writes, فَنَظَرَ حُسَيْنٌ إِلَى وَجْهِ Ali Akbar. That Hussein would watch the face of Akbar as Akbar would fight on the day of Ashura. But then after that it says, وَتَنْظُرُ لَيْلَ إِلَى وَجْهِ الْحُسَيْنِ. That Hussein would look at the face of Ali Akbar, and Layla would watch the face of Hussein. That if the face of the Imam changed into worry, Layla would know that her Akbar is in difficulty. A point it comes, Ali Akbar is surrounded from all sides. Imam al-Hussein is in a state of worry. Layla says, oh Hussein, has something happened to our Akbar? The Imam says, oh Layla, the dua of a mother for her son is mustajab. At that point, Layla, she raises her hand. She says, Ya Rad Yusuf ila Yaqub wa Ismail ila Hajra Urdud ilayya waladi Ali. She says, oh, the one who returned Ismail back to Hajra, and the one who returned Yusuf back to Yaqub, return my Ali Akbar towards me. When Ali Akbar returns to the Imam, Akbar, he says a line. He says, Ya Abate, al-atashu qad qatalani. That, oh my father, the thirst is killing me and this armor is burning me. You know, Sheikh Abbas al-Qummi, when he wrote this Masaib and Nafas al-Mahmoom, he mentions an incident from the day of Siffin. He says that on the day of Siffin, Muhammad al-Hanafiya came to Amir al-Mu'mineen. And when Muhammad al-Hanafiya came to the Imam, Amir al-Mu'mineen began to pour water on the armor of Muhammad al-Hanafiya. Muhammad al-Hanafiya says, oh father, why are you pouring water upon my armor? Amir al-Mu'mineen says, oh Muhammad, when the heat is coming down, the armor, it begins to burn. I'm putting this water so the armor could cool down. I say, Ya Ali, look at Hussein in Karbala. When Ali Akbar comes and he says, oh father, the thirst is killing me. The Imam says, oh Akbar, your grandfather Rasulullah will give you from the pool of Kawthar, oh Ali Akbar. Ali Akbar, he returns to the Maktal. He begins to fight. It's stated at that moment, فَقَتَلُوهُ إِرْبًا إِرْبًا, that from all sides Akbar is surrounded. An individual strikes Ali Akbar with the sword, but one moment it comes, an arrow is fired into the chest of Ali Akbar. Akbar, he gives his salam towards his father. At that point, Imam al-Husayn, he goes to the body of Ali Akbar. فَوَضَى خَدُّهُ عَلَى خَدِّهِ. Imam al-Husayn places his cheek on the cheek of Ali Akbar. He says, oh Akbar, after you may this world be no more, oh Ali Akbar. But at that moment, Imam al-Husayn, he sees that there is a broken arrow in the chest of Ali Akbar. When Ibrahim was sacrificing Ismail, Ismail turned his face away. And he said, oh father, A father shouldn't see his son in his final moment. Imam Husayn, he places one hand on the arrow, one hand on the chest of Ali Akbar. He begins to pull the arrow from the chest of Ali Akbar. He says, Inna lillahi wa inna ilayhi raji'un. At that moment, he looks towards Najaf. He says, oh Father, you lifted the door of Khaybar. Look at Hussein in Karbala. Hussein is taking an arrow out of the chest of his son. Ala la'natullah ala al-qawm al-dhalimeen. Ya Allah, we ask through the right of the Musibah of Ali Akbar. You see, tears are following at this moment. When tears, they begin to fall, that's when du'as are accepted. You know, when the head of Ali Akbar was taken to Kufa, when the Christian women, they saw the head of Ali Akbar, they said that the mother of this young man must have died when they saw him in such a state. At that point, they would say, no, his mother Layla is here at this moment. Through the right of the Musibah of Ali Akbar, wherever the followers of Ahlul Bayt are in difficulty, help them. Wherever they're sick and ailing, cure them. Ya Allah, there are many who have hajat. There are many who are sick and ill. Ya Allah, through the right of Muhammad and Ali Muhammad, help them. And we pray for the hastening of the reappearance of the master of our time, Matam Husayn.
اکبر تمہیں معلوم ہے کیا مانگ رہے ہو تم باپ سے مرنے کی رضا مانگ رہے ہو اکبر تمہیں معلوم ہے کیا مانگ رہے ہو تم باپ سے مرنے کی رضا مانگ رہے ہو اس عالم غربت میں تمہیں جانے دو کیسے اس دشت مصیبت میں تمہیں جانے دو کیسے اس وقت قیامت میں تمہیں جانے دو کیسے اے لال جو تم اذن وگا مانگ رہے ہو تم باپ سے مرنے کی رضا مانگ رہے ہو معلوم ہے کیا مانگ رہے ہو کیا گزرے کہ اس باپ کے دل پر نہیں سوچا تم نے یہ میری جاں علی اکبر نہیں سوچا مر جاؤں گا میں تجھ سے بچھڑ کر نہیں سوچا تم مجھ سے ضعیفی کا عصا مانگ رہے ہو سے مرنے کی رضا مانگ رہے ہو اکبر تمہیں معلوم ہے کیا مانگ رہے ہو پر محمد والے محمد صلوات السلام علیکہ یا رسول اللہ السلام علیکہ یا علی المرتضی السلام علیکہ یا فاطمۃ الزہرا السلام علیکہ یا حسن مجتبی السلام علیکہ یا ابا عبداللہ وعلی الارواح التي حلت بفنائق علیک منی سلام اللہ ابدا ما بقیت وبقی اللیل والنہار ولا جہل اللہ الآخرۃ العہدی منی لزیارتکم السلام علی الحسین وعلی علی ابن الحسین وعلی اولاد الحسین وعلی اصحاب الحسین خصوصاً سیدی و مولاي ابا الفضل عباس عباس ابن أمير المؤمنين وقاسم ابن الحسن ومسلم ابن أقيل وهاني ابن أروى وحبيب ابن مزاهر وهور الشهيد الرياحي. السلام عليك جميعا شهداء ورحمة الله وبركاته. السلام عليك يا مولا وابن مولا. السلام عليك يا غريب الغرباء. السلام عليك يا شمس السموس يا نيس النفوس يا علي بن موسى الرضا ورحمة الله وبركاته. السلام عليك يا مولانا صاحب الأسر والزمان. الأمان الأمان الأمان. السلام عليك يا خليفة الرحمن. السلام عليك يا شريك القرآن. السلام عليك يا إمام الإنس والجان. أجل الله تعالى فرجك وسهل الله تعالى مخرجك وجعلنا من أعوانك وأنصارك ورحمة الله وبركاته. يا صاحب الزمان يا بن الحسن الأصغري عجل على ظهوري. يا صاحب الزمان يا بن الحسن الأصغري عجل على ظهوري. يا صاحب الزمان يا بن الحسن الأصغري عجل على ظهوري.